Salams, this is People's Dispatch and you're watching the Daily Roundup, our selection of some of the top news stories from around the world. Let's take a look at today's headlines. The US government has approved Alaskan oil drilling projects despite the climate risks. A South African court has ordered striking health workers back to work. In Europe, arms trade is on the rise and global numbers are falling, says a new report. And the Colombian president has announced a peace process with FARC dissidents. First up, the United States government will approve an oil and gas drilling project worth an estimated $7 billion in the state of Alaska. This was announced by the Department of Interior on Monday, the 13th of March. According to reports, the project has been given the green light. Now is a relatively scaled down version of the original. Owned by the oil company ConocoPhillips, the project is called the Willow Project and involves developing 3 drilling sites in the northwestern part of Alaska. The original project consisted of 5 drilling sites in addition to project infrastructure such as dozens of miles of roads as well as pipelines and 7 bridges. The government has earlier raised doubts about the project, citing environmental impact and other concerns, following which it declared 3 million acres of undisturbed land off the Beaufort Sea in the Arctic as protected, deeming a vast swath of the area indefinitely off limits to such drilling projects. In addition to the 3 million acres, the government issued protections for 13 million acres additionally of ecologically sensitive special areas within Alaska's petroleum reserves. The government's decision to approve the project was welcomed by Alaskan officials and politicians, as well as members of the oil and gas industry, who said that it will create thousands of jobs and generate billions of dollars in revenue. However, environmental groups denounced the government's decision and said it stands in clear contravention of the government's goal of decarbonizing the US economy and transitioning to clean and green fuel sources. This is what, of course, it has stated in its efforts to combat global climate change. The environmental group Food and Water Watch's executive director, Winona Horter, in a response said, and I quote, "Promoting clean energy development is meaningless if we continue to allow corporations to plunder and pollute as they wish." End quote. Another local environmental and indigenous rights group, the NDN Collective, in a response, released a statement in which it termed the decision a climate disaster in the making. It went on to call the government's decision immoral and noted that it will have devastating consequences for the indigenous people in the native village of Nuskut. Environmental groups have additionally indicated that they intend to legally challenge and stop the project in courts. The South African Labour Appeal Council on Monday as well ordered striking public sector healthcare workers in the country to end their week-long strike and to report to work on Tuesday morning. Health workers in the country have been staging walkouts since the beginning of last week over long-standing low-wage issues and demanding that the government increase their wages at least in line with the rate of inflation so that they can afford decent living conditions in the face of rising expenses. According to the National Education, Health and Allied Workers Union, the government has only offered health workers a 3% wage hike for the year 22-23 and has proceeded to impose its implementation on the workers despite the government and the union representatives at the time being engaged in negotiations for a better solution. For the year 23-24, the government has claimed to offer workers a 4.7% wage hike, which the union has also rejected, alleging that it's actually less by 0.5%, taking into account the one-time cash gratuity. The union further noted that a majority of workers have rejected the government's wage hike altogether. They are instead demanding an above-inflation 10% wage rise. Inflation in South Africa currently stands at close to 7% as per latest statistics. The court's decision comes in the midst of the government saying that the strike has severely affected access to health services in the country, especially in the country's biggest hospitals. Following the court's order, the health department said it would help stabilize healthcare services across the country, adding that strike action had also affected clinical operations due to the low turnout of nursing as well as administrative staff. South Africa's Health Minister Joe Fala, in a statement, noted that the strike had led to untold suffering and frustrations amongst the public who desperately needed healthcare and life-saving treatment. Reports noted that the health department saying that as per the country's Labour Relations Act, essential services workers are prohibited from engaging in strike action which is detrimental to healthcare services or risks a loss of life. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute on Monday released its latest report on global arms trade for the 5-year period between 2018 and 22, when compared to the previous 5-year period of 2013 to 2017. The report found that European countries have drastically increased import of major weapons in the wake of the outbreak of conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The report says that European nations have seen a spike of almost 50% in arms imports in this 5-year period. Even among those countries, NATO members witnessed an even bigger increase of about 65% in arms imports in the same period. CIPRI highlighted the fact that the increase in arms imports by Europe goes against the global trend of a decline in arms sales. It said that levels fell by around 5% globally in the same period. Detailing a steady decline in arms trade, the report noted that arms imports in Africa, for example, fell by as much as 40%, in the Americas by over 21%, and in Asia and Oceania by over 7%. The only other region, other than Europe that is of course, which saw arms imports increase was East Asia, where a 20% rise over a 5-year period was noted. The report attributes this primarily to countries which are allies of the United States and are substantially increasing their arms imports. South Africa, for example, had an increase of 61%, Japan over 170%, and Australia by almost a quarter. As a result, the US once again easily emerged as the world's largest arms supplier and exporter, increasing its overall sales by close to 15% over the 4-year period and accounting for 40% of global arms exports. Russia is the second largest exporter, but it saw its exports fall by over 30%, and therefore its consequent share in the global arms export market decreased by 16%. This was because of other countries such as France increasing arms exports in the same period, while subsequently increasing its global share in arms trade. India is once again the world's biggest arms importer, followed by Qatar and Ukraine, whose arms imports saw a major rise as a result of the war with Russia. And finally, Colombian President Gustavo Petro announced that his government and the Estado Mayor Central, the dissident group of the Demobilized Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia People's Army, the FARC-EP guerrilla group, would soon begin peace talks. The head of state announced the news on Twitter, saying, and I quote, "A second peace process begins. A negotiation table will be established between the government and the Estado Mayor Central," Gustavo Petro tweeted. In another message, he celebrated that with the beginning of talks with the group, practically half of the people currently in arms enter into negotiations with the Colombian government. The announcement came hours after the Attorney General's office suspended arrest warrants against 19 members of the dissident group who rejected the 2016 Havana peace agreements. Petro has vowed to end Colombia's 6 decades plus of internal armed conflict and bring total peace to the country by engaging in dialogue and negotiations with former drug trafficking groups. The Petro government is already in peace talks with the ELN as well. On Friday last week, the government said the ELN concluded a second round of peace talks and agreed on a definitive agenda that will guide the following stages of negotiations between the two parties. The delegation of both sides also reached an agreement on initial elements for a bilateral ceasefire. According to the Colombian human rights organization, the Institute of Development and Peace Studies, so far 23 irregular armed groups operating in Colombia have expressed their intention to join Petro's total peace policy and accept legal benefits in exchange for peace and definitive non-repetition of violence. And that brings to an end this episode of the Daily Roundup. For more details on these stories, head to our website peoplesdispatch.org, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We'll see you tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.